Om Sahanā-Vavatu Bhunaktu Vīryam Karavā-vahai Tejas Vinā Vadhīta Mastu Ma Vidvishā-Vahai. Om Shānti, Shānti, Shāntihi. And below Satguru Sivananda Saraswati for all of the saints and sages of all the traditions. Jai Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay. So we're in chapter 9. And the topic is from thoughts to thought transcendence. So the way we tend to relate to thought, universal, is my thought. The my is implied when we talk about thought, generally speaking. So I'm thinking about this, I'm considering doing this, I'm thinking about going there, I'm meditating upon this or that, considering this. And then when you look, we hear something like 75,000 thoughts a day. That's a number you'll hear in TTC again. That general experience, this real life, what we call it, that we're bombarded with something like 75,000 thoughts a day. And if you look at them and categorize them, food would be maybe half. Maintenance of the body is a significant part of them. And then the long list of things that we think we should be doing, that we're contemplating, and then the considerations of what other people are doing and thinking about them. These are like this. And generally when we talk about thought, in the Raja Yoga Sutras, we hear the teaching of yoga is Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means the stilling of the thought or the transcending of the thought. And it's really the I-ness and mindness, and we'll confuse this. When we look at the example of the saints and sages, if we can see their inside, their thought world, we see that the I thought is absent. There's no thought about what I need, what I want, it would be nice if this, and I wish this person would leave and someone else would show up, and all of that. None of those thoughts whatsoever. But it doesn't mean that they're absent of thought. Swami Sivananda focuses much of the teaching on the use of thought to serve, to be of benefit. So bringing uplifting thought, bringing beneficial thought. So what we were discussing some yesterday is this point of from thought to thought transcendence is a movement from the place where we are as if subject to the thought, bombarded by the thought, to a great extent owned by the thoughts, ruled by the thoughts, right? If we haven't experienced it in this birth, certainly we've had the experience, which is the desire to fulfill whatever the heart desires. And how do we know what the heart desires? Well, we hear it in our mind. We hear it from our own self. I wish I could do this. It would be wonderful if I could go to India. And we won't say that's a bad desire. We won't. It'll be, I need a new car. I want a new car. I want a new girlfriend. I want a new boyfriend. I want this. I want that. So, and then we're hearing that, as it were, and then it seems like our mission is to fulfill it. And that is tantamount to being owned by the thoughts, not the other way around. We're not using the thoughts at that point. The thoughts are using us. Does that make sense? The thoughts are using us. So it's said that the mind is a terrible master. It's really an unreasonable master when it is the master, because nothing will ever satisfy. I've lived the dream. We all have at some level. And we hear within ourselves, I need to do this, and then we do it. And is it ever enough? It never satisfies. It never fulfills. So these are ideas that are bubbling up, desires that are bubbling up, and we try this career, did it fulfill? Did the career fulfill, right? Nothing fulfills. And I could speak to money and cars or any subject, really, from personal experience, which is there's never enough money. There's never a nice enough car. And by the way, if you have the car that you think is going to be nice enough, then
there's always a better one.
Yeah, and then somebody might ding it. So it's a never-ending sea when we're owned by the thoughts. Thought transcendence is the movement from being owned by the thought to being the master of the thought, to utilizing the thought as a tool. We were talking about yesterday a knife. We pick up a knife, we utilize a knife, we never for a moment take ourselves to be the knife. And we don't ask the knife, what would you like to do today? We don't say, dear knife, what are we going to cut? Yes? We say, let's cut this. When you get in the car, you don't ask the car, where do you want to take me today? Or do you? Maybe you did, and the car wanted to come to the ashram, so here you are. Nice car. Nice car. Sattvic car. How did the car get trained that way? What you do is you get in and you say, okay, I want to go to ashram. But in the same way, the mind is instrument. It's not intended as master. It's intended as instrument. And the rest of that saying is that the mind is a terrible master, but a beautiful servant. And for the one who's able to make that transition, and this is really what yoga is about, is the movement from, because mind, thought is the world. If you're going to be in the world, you're dealing with thought. So we can't be free of thought, but we can be free of I-ness and mine-ness, and we can be the master of the thoughts. And that's really this movement from thought, which is about being owned by thought or manipulated by thought or being ruled by thought, or it's telling us what to do based upon the conditioning, to where we are now free of the thought. Free of the thought. Freedom is really free of thought. It doesn't mean thoughtless, of course. We were talking about that yesterday. What, in common parlance, it doesn't mean like not considerate, because really it's the thought themselves that are veiling us. The I thought, the my thought. We were talking yesterday evening about compassion and heart of compassion, and how it is that this human heart gets so overloaded with suffering. And this was Ram Dass. And we steel ourselves. We create a shield for ourselves, and that shield is the mind. So we'll pick up here. So thoughts to thought transcendence. So from moving from being the slave of the thought to the master of the thought, as it were. But not identified with thought. You see, the one using the knife is never identified with the knife. The one using the car is never identified with the car. And in the same way, the one using thoughts is never identified with the thoughts. They're beneficial thoughts. Why is it that in order to bring a thought towards someone, may you be free, and really bring the bhava into it and the inside, may you be free. My dear, I understand you're dealing with a difficult situation. May you be uplifted. May you feel yourself free. May you see the resolution of this situation. What's wrong with that? And do you see, that's not a thought that owns you. That's a thought that you call forward and you utilize because you know something about the power of thought. And you know that thoughts like this, sattvic thoughts, are healing. And you know that they're available to you. Yes? And so this is this movement from one place to this place of having transcended. Doesn't mean no thought. Okay. And in Raja Yoga Sutras, it's the same meaning. It's the same meaning. And the vrittis are the thoughts that are pestering us, as it were.
What is the stopping of the modifications of the mind?
Yeah.
Not stopping of the modifications.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll pick up here. Thoughts and actions. Thoughts are dormant seeds of actions. The mind's acts, and not the bodily acts, are the true acts. It is the actions of the mind that are truly termed karmas. So it's a teaching of karma there that he's sharing. We think it's the physical action, but it's actually the thought. And there's an interesting parallel here with Christ Jesus the Christ, when he had come. He said, I came not to change the law, but to reveal it. And he would say about adultery, for example, the 10 don'ts, the 10 commandments. He'd say, you hear this, but I tell you it means don't even think about it, because the thought is the karma. And the thought is actually the action. So, and then the action follows. He says thought and act are interdependent. When we act, we strengthen the thought, and when we think, we strengthen the propensity to act. So they're interdependent. There's no such thing as mind apart from thought. Thoughts constitute the mind. And it's an interesting philosophical point as well. The only way that you know you have a mind is because of thought. So when I would talk with Swami Ramaswarup, I would ask something like, do you mind? And he would laugh at me and say, no mind. Because he had no thought on the matter. Most people would say, yeah, well, I'd prefer it if you did this or that. Yeah, no preference about it. No mind. Words are nothing but the outward expressions of thoughts which are imperceptible. Actions are caused by feelings of desire and aversion. These feelings are caused by the fact that you attribute a pleasurable or painful nature to objects. Thought is finite. It is inadequate to express even temporal processes, not to speak of the absolute, which is inexpressible. The body with its organs is no other than the mind. And we had reviewed this earlier. He's bringing the points back. And this is, it seems a subtle point. But when we speak, it's just a gross form of thought. Does that make sense? There's a thought underlying it. Because the vocalization is loud, then you might not see the connection. But if you look, you'll always see the thought underlying. So, and have you ever been with someone who simply, it's just no judgment at all, but it's just a beautiful amplification of what he's saying or example of what he's saying. Have you ever been with someone who just says what they think, just like that? Yeah. So the only difference is we might be choosing which thoughts to express. But still, it's the same. They're the same. So words are the outward expression of thoughts which are imperceptible. The thoughts you can't perceive, but the words you can. Actions are caused by feelings of desire and aversion, covered. And then he says the body with its organs is no other than the mind, and it's something we explore a lot. That really the body exists in mind. It takes its shape in the mind. Body doesn't exist independent of mind. Thoughts, peace, and strength. And again, example. The saint or sage Ramana Maharshi is a very good example of this, because last night when we watched that little video, Ram Dass talked about the disciples of Ramana Maharshi who were very upset because he was leaving the body, right? And they're crying and wailing, "Don't leave us, Bhagavan, don't leave us." And he said, "Don't be silly. Where could I go? I'm just dropping the body." And so for him, the body thought isn't there. For most of us, the body thought is here. And for most of us, the body thought is a ruler of us. But the one who's transcended, which is just, the one who's transcended is just an example of what we look like when we've transcended. That's all. The saint and sage is simply an expression of us when we're in the clear. And for the one who's transcended, there's not that body thought. People will say sometimes, "Well, what do you do about the body? How do you maintain the body?" And I'll laugh and say, nature maintains the body. And then that sounds like some nature, which is some abstract something separate from us, that I'm relying upon that to defend the body. But no, in other words, hunger will come when it's time for the body to eat, but that's independent of me. I'm not hungry. That's nature expressing. And by the way, the body and mind on their own will go off and find food. I'm perfectly confident of it. And if not, then it will be time for it to fast. And that's fine too. When it's mealtime, when it's supposed to eat, it'll be offered somehow, or it will go off and find it. So
you don't have to think this is hunger.
You don't have to identify with the thoughts. You can allow them to be. They're not yours anyway. So it's not a matter of stopping the thoughts, the base level thoughts, the body thoughts, etc. It's not a matter of that. We had Swami Sivananda said something very, very helpful yesterday, if we catch it, which is that the desire itself is fine. It's all of the thought being perpetuated around it that you get wrapped up in. And now the desire becomes all important to you. And so you put the soul power, you put the will into it, lean into it. And now it's all about, okay, I'm going to be happy when I get that. But the desire itself, no. And hunger itself, fine. But when you pick that up and start ruminating upon it, and what am I going to have now? And now the intellect is involved, and this is what's offered, but I really don't want that. I don't like that much. What do I really need? And now, I wish I had some
samsara.
And now you're all caught up in it. And where did your peace go?
To 75,000.
Oh, okay. Thought, peace, and strength. A little more. Thoughts, peace, and strength. And this is the point we were discussing yesterday. Over back in the library. The fewer the desires, the lesser the thoughts. Become absolutely desireless. The wheel of mind will stop entirely. If you reduce your wants in the wheel of mind, this kind of thought that we're talking about, that will stop. Fewer the desires. So, and the wheel of the mind is what's binding us. It's the I, me mind caught up with all of this thought activity and oh my God, how many births? If you do not try to fulfill your desires, if you try to eradicate your desires one by one, you see Shivadas, this was the spiritual practice with the craving. Your thoughts will diminish in frequency and length. The number of thoughts also per minute will diminish. Fewer the thoughts, greater the peace. Remember this always. A wealthy person who's engaged in speculation in a big city and who has a large number of thoughts has a restless mind in spite of his comforts, whereas a sadhu who lives in the cave of the Himalayas and who is practicing thought control is very happy in spite of his poverty. Fewer the thoughts, greater the mental strength and concentration. Suppose that the average number of thoughts that pass through your brain within 1 hour is 100. If you succeed in reducing it by constant practice of concentration and meditation to 90, if you reduce it from 100 to 90, you've gained 10% of the power of concentration of mind. Every thought that is reduced adds strength and peace to the mind. Both strength and peace. How does the strength play out? Having practiced for some time and dedicating my life to controlling the thoughts and to making the thoughts beneficial as an offering instead of about me and what I needed. And that's really the practice of yoga, is this. Having dedicated in this way and having seen it, what we see is that we become less and less pestered, but we have to actively practice in this way. We have to actually take on this attitude of tapasya or austerity, and the things that we desired in the past, first, that we've already come to see not really beneficial, we have to refuse ourselves these things, refuse the body these things. And more really take control and bring beneficial thoughts at the same time, more and more beneficial. So replace. He says, ignore, replace, ignore, forget, and replace. That 3-step. This is practice. What do we see? As we start to get daylight within ourselves, we see the power of the thoughts that are being brought to heal and to uplift. We see them strengthen. And we begin to see that people that we genuinely bring a beneficial, uplifting thought experience it. And we see that we can pick someone out in a market who's clearly having a terrible day. And we can look at them and radiate to them. And just radiate to them. And we see that they feel an uplift. It's not a parlor trick. We see more and more that as the worthless thoughts fall away, as we're not interested in them anymore, and as we're not engaging in them anymore, we see the peace pervade. And when the peace pervades, we have more capacity to engage and select beneficial thoughts and beneficial actions, more capacity to act instead of react. The reactionary tendencies fall away. And now you're as if in the clear, standing in the sun, and you can act. And someone says something and no mind. It's fine. Whenever they say it's fine. In other words, no disturbance, no reaction. No fear arising, no anger coming up. And then in this space, choosing a thought, choosing a prayer, choosing something specific as an offering and offering it. This is this transcendence that's being discussed. And it comes, as Swami Sivananda is saying, it's just little. With the resolve, and then and there are 100 a day or 100 an hour, for example, and then they're 99 and 95. And sometimes you feel like, I'll never get there. But with the intention, then you get there. So last concept that he shares is thought, energy, and sacred thoughts. He says thought is a finer manifestation of being than ether or energy. You think because you share the universal thought. It's not a personal thought, it's universal thought. Mind is a universal factor. Thought is both force and motion. Thought is dynamic. Thought moves. Thought decides the future. As you think, so you become. Thought makes a saint or a sinner, and thought shapes a person. Think that you are Brahman, and Brahman you become. Sacred thoughts generate and sustain divine thoughts. Thoughts of hatred interfere with the inner harmony of the heart. Every useless thought is wastage of energy. Useless thoughts are obstacles to spiritual growth. Every thought must have a definite purpose. So he gives us that as inspiration. To think a thing, there has to be a purpose. There wants to be a purpose to it. Otherwise, why bother? And yes, it's possible. No, it's not easy. Yes, it's possible. Peace Pilgrim would say, one of the great quotes of our dear inspiration, Peace Pilgrim, if you knew the power of your thoughts, you would never think a negative thought again. And that's it, is learning the power of the thought, and learning what's a beneficial thought, what's not a beneficial thought, what's a beneficial relationship with thoughts, what's a harmful relationship with thoughts. Learning how they're tools and how to utilize them as tools. Learning that the entire inner environment can be changed, and when the inner environment is changed, the outer environment is changed. Learning that thought itself is the transformative factor. Opens the door of life. Opens the door to God. It opens the door, the universal door. That thought is really, this ability to transform the thought in this way is really the key to the kingdom. And it's step by step, but still it's true. Swami, I'll share a little story, a fun story from Swami Ramaswarup. And our dear Swami Ramaswarup, we have grown to appreciate him so much. Such a simple saint, you would never know. Initially being in his company, you would just know that you were loved. But he doesn't speak in big ways. He doesn't sound gloriously intelligent. He doesn't seem supremely devoted. His devotion is an inner practice, which we learned is constant. He was with his guru, Swami Chidananda, for 35 years, and he became his guru. On the inside, the devotion is so complete that there's no separation whatsoever on the inside. He remembers every story of every moment that he was with his guru, and he'll share them at a moment's notice at the right time. So many stories he shared. He shared one. I'll share. Compassion. He used to walk with Swami Chidananda, and Swami Chidananda's great saint. Great meaning big orator, traveled the world, talked with everyone, met the Pope, and gave talks at the Council of World Religions, the 100th anniversary one, like that. Great saint. Millions know Swami Chidananda. And Swami Ramaswarup followed him everywhere. And he told this story. One day, they were just walking. And part of Swami Ramaswarup's job was to carry the candy. he carried the camera and he carried the candy. And and the candy's for the kids. Whenever a kid would come along, Swami Chidananda would want to offer candy. So Swami Ramaswami carried the candy. One day they were out walking, a group of them, and Swami Chidananda, he saw something, and no one else was seeing it. And he was looking. He'd stopped and he was looking, and everybody's trying to figure out what he's looking at. No one knows what he's looking at. And he asked Swamiji also for a penknife. Swamiji also carried a penknife for him. And so he opened up the penknife and handed it to Swami Chidananda. And Swami Chidananda walked over to a storm grate on the road. And he bent over, and what he had seen was a line of ants that were crossing the road, and they were carrying the carcass of a worm. And the worm was too big to get through the storm grate. And so he bent over and he cut that carcass into 3 pieces so that they could get their prize through the storm grate and continue on with their mission. Is that something? So that completely present. Transcended. In the mind is the idea that I know. But when the mind is quiet, there is knowing. In the mind is the idea that I will care, I will heal, I will fix, I will correct. And in the heart, the real heart, the deep heart, is the reality of compassion, is the reality of hearing, the reality of seeing. And so this path is really about changing positions. So here's the story. This is a story of Ramaswarupananda, Swami Ramaswarupananda, and it's related to these divine thoughts, these uplifting thoughts, and how it works. In the ashram, of course, we have photos of saints and sages around. You won't see the photos of the presidents here. You won't see the scoundrels here, even though we have to love them too. So, the day that I was taking sannyas, Swami Ramaswarup was walking with me to the Ganga in Haridwar. And we had walked this path before, and it's there's a ghat at the river, and that's where we were going for the ceremony. And there's a pathway, and on the left side as we would walk, there's a little center, there's a big tree right there, and then the pathway, and it's a dirt road, one lane. Cars no on that particular road. It's a walkway. And on the left-hand side, there was a guest house, and then a concrete wall around the guest house. And about every 10 or 15 feet, there was an image of a saint on this wall, leading to the ghat. And I'd never paid attention to it before. I'd seen them. I mean, I would see them. But I hadn't paid attention to it. And Swamiji looked at it and pointed to it, and he said, "Do you know why those are there?" I said, "No, Swamiji, please tell me." He said, "You know that India doesn't have any public facilities, right? People go to the bathroom everywhere." He said, "Do you smell pee here?" "No, Swamiji." He said, "That's why they're there."
Yes.
Because actually that image of the divine will bring a divine thought, and one doesn't want to pee in front of God. That's the example. That's the example. In the company of divine thoughts, we change. In the company of divine thoughts, we change. We're uplifted. So he talks about the power of bringing divine thoughts, about bringing whatever, however we have to do it, bringing uplifting thoughts home. Okay, so that's the discussion for this morning. Any thoughts, questions, anything on the subject?
I had a good conversation with somebody before I came to Ashram that I ran into, and young 20s gentleman. We started talking about thought, and it surprised me that most people, I think, aren't aware that everything starts with thought, because it sounded so foreign to him. And then the light went off, and he got it after our 10-minute conversation. You know, that everything is manifested, everything occurs with an idea, a thought, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. The same had to happen to you at some point.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be surprising. It's the way it is.
Yeah.
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 So.
Had to be. Somebody had to tell me.
Right.
And then I had to believe it.
Yeah.
See it.
Taking birth here, this is the human experience.
Right.
So. What's the song, Gopala? Only to remember nothing at all? Is that it? Is that the line? What's the full line?
Gosh, that's an old one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Verbatim.
Say that one more time, Swami.
Only to remember nothing at all. The full line, there's more to the line. There's a lead into the line.
Yeah.
Talk about being in a prison?
No, it's a song I wrote. I just can't remember it.
Yeah.
Prison of the mind.
It's called Fool's Requiem.
Yeah. It's okay. It's okay. The punchline was that.
Yeah.
The point was that we come into this body, and coming into this body and experiencing this birth, we forget everything important.
Oh. And we forget everything.
To remember nothing at all.
I can't remember it at all.
And the mind itself is the veil.
Oh.
Having said that, the mind is actually not an enemy, but it behaves as one. It's not actually a friend, although it can be trained to be one.
Just be quiet.
Oh, okay. Let's close then. Yes, Shivadas. Oh, you're remembering.
Was reborn. Once upon a time,
See? We listen.
Reborn, only to remember.
Nothing. That's okay. It's a request, seed planted for our kirtan this afternoon. How's that? Okay, let's close with final prayers in Arati, page 174. Om Chayambakam Yajame Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Om Chayambakam Yajame Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Om Chayambakam Yajame Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Sarvesham Swastir-Bhavatu. Sarvesham Shantir-Bhavatu. Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu. Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu. Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. Sarve Shantu Niramaya. Sarve Bhadrani Pasyanto Makashi Dukhabha Bhave. Asatoma Satgamaya. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Mritorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudashyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishate. Om Shānti Shānti Shāntihi. Adorable Lord of mercy and love, salutations and prostrations unto thee. Thou art omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Thou art Satchidananda. Thou art existence, knowledge, and bliss absolute. Thou art the indweller of all beings. Grant us an understanding heart, equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion, and wisdom. Grant us inner spiritual strength to resist temptation, to control the mind. Free us from egoism, lust, anger, greed, hatred, and jealousy. Fill our hearts with divine virtues. Let us behold thee in all these names and forms. Let us serve thee in all these names and forms. Let us ever remember thee. Let us ever sing thy glories. Let thy name be ever on our lips. Let us abide in thee forever and ever. On behalf of Sakura Shivananda Maharaj Ki, and for all of the saints and sages of all the traditions. Om Namah Shivaya.